Cannock Chase in Staffordshire, a beautiful forest enjoyed by walkers and cyclists, but few know about the wartime secret that it holds. Beyond these trees is a graveyard to nearly 5,000 soldiers, the final resting place of the fallen from the First and Second World Wars. But a closer look at the headstones here in the heart of Staffordshire reveals that these soldiers are a long way from home. Nearly 700,000 German soldiers were captured by the Allies during the two World Wars. Many were brought to prisoner of war camps in the UK and put to work on farms and in factories. Some died in captivity and were laid to rest in graves all over Britain. That is, until 1959, when the British and West German governments agreed to a mass exhumation of the scattered bodies. They brought them together and reburied them in a 6-acre site at Cannock Chase, a new cemetery. The Deutscher Soldatenfriedhof was created for the German people. There are nearly 5,000 buried here. I mean, how did they get here?
Well, it was a major operation by train, heavy goods vehicle. So it was a big operation. It took a number of years.
And how did many of them die?
Most of the war dead at Cannock Chase were soldiers serving in the German armies in the First or Second World Wars, and they later died in captivity. There's also quite a lot of combat deaths, especially from the Second World War. So these were men who died in combat in the skies above Britain. Airmen who were in the Luftwaffe make up about half, or almost half, of the Second World War burials here.
In a corner of the German cemetery, among the fallen from the First World War, lies the grave of Paul Sosinka, who died in 1916. He was one of 260 prisoners of war working in an iron ore mine on the Scottish island of Raasay. And this is where Paul Sosinka is buried. Now, exactly how did he die?
Well, there was an accident at the mine a few days after Christmas 1916, and the mining shaft in which Sosinka was working collapsed. So he was killed. Now, accidents weren't all that common, although it was a very large mine, and it actually played a vital role in the British war effort.
So the German prisoners of war were working alongside British workers?
Of course, there was quite strong anti-German feeling in Britain during the war years, but on the Isle of Raasay, the German prisoners and their British co-workers appear to have got on quite well. We know, for example, that the British miners shared their food with the German prisoners whose rations weren't all that generous. We know also that the German prisoners made toys for the island children.
Nationwide, the enemy at home was largely well treated by the British government, who'd led the way in signing the Hague Convention in 1907. It set in stone humane and fair treatment of prisoners of war. But this goodwill would be tested to the limit during the Second World War with the arrival of captured Nazi prisoners of war. In a simple grave here at Cannock Chase lies one of Hitler's highly decorated henchmen. General Maximilian von Herf was head of personnel in the SS. He worked alongside the notorious Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Nazi concentration camps. Von Herf helped stamp out the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943 by Polish Jews who'd learnt their fate. They would be deported to concentration camps. In under a month, 7,000 lives were lost in the fighting and the ghetto destroyed. So how does von Herf come to be buried here?
Well, he was captured by the Allies in May 1945. He was transported to Britain. He was interned in a prisoner of war camp in Cumbria, and he died there shortly afterwards. Not a great deal is known about the circumstances of his death.
But most of those buried here, brought together finally in this little bit of Germany on British soil, were young, rank-and-file conscripts. Time has healed many of the old war wounds. At Cannock Chase, the War Graves Commission continues to keep Britain's 50-year-old promise to respect Germany's fallen.
What a striking graveyard that
An
is,
incredible sight, isn't it?
Some place.
A nice story. And Charles, you've come across some other positive
Well, particularly stories to do with the Second World War, because at the end of the Second World War, there were still people in prisoner of war camps, and they weren't allowed home immediately. And many of them chose to stay here. And of course, during the war, they couldn't fraternize with the British, but some of them were able to do so, working on farms and things. And there were romances gradually blossoming. But until 1947, you could not marry a German prisoner of war. It was against the law. 1947 in July, the law changes, and within a year, wait for it, there are some 796 British girls and young women who choose to marry German prisoners of war.
They were holding back all that time.
And we have discovered that one of these girls is now a one-show viewer. A girl, then called June, who married Heinz Felbrich in 1947. And her husband, Heinz, was still a prisoner of war. At the end of the day, he had to go back to the camp. But they were allowed to marry, they got married, and this is a picture of them on their wedding day. And you see at the end of the day, when dusk falls, he goes back to 402 PW camp, somewhere near Southampton. There she is.
There's a musical.
Plot of a musical.
It is definitely. It's so romantic.
And it has, what is lovely is it has a happy ending, because for 6 months he's there in the POW camp, then he comes out, and they live together for 60 years. This is them at their Diamond Jubilee. June and Heinz. Isn't that a lovely story?
Yes, it's lovely.
And so, June, we send you a kiss.
She is watching, we know she's watching.
Not feeling too well.
No,
today.
she's not. Hello,
I hope this will
June.
cheer
Hope
her
you get
up.
well
It's a
soon.
wonderful story.
The kissing.
Love does change everything.
Love changes everything,
And if you want, I mean, I'm not sure that the musicals involving football always work, but there was a famous German who stayed on after the war. I mean, some 24,000 German POWs must have liked it here, because they stayed on after the Second World War. And you know who it is? Bert Trautmann, who played for
Manchester City.
Manchester City. He was the goalie. He joined Manchester City in 1949.
He broke his neck in a cup final.
Correct. In the 1956 Cup final, playing Birmingham City, he broke his neck 50 minutes to go, but he played on. And Manchester City won 3-1. He becomes a hero. The enemy 10 years before now is a hero. Watch him being greeted and treated as a hero as he returns to Manchester.
Can't get a word in either.
You can't show off.
So there we are.
But did he start off like that then?
He didn't start off like that at all, I'm afraid. In the 1940s, when he joined the club, people were disapproving. People with season tickets were cancelling their season tickets. Letters of protest, people shouting in the streets. They didn't want him. But he won them round because he played for the team and played well.